Hi everybody in English 220. It's your professor again, Jessie Caton, and today I'm going to give you a brief, very brief, too brief, of an introduction to the work of Karl Marx and Marxist theory. So this is one of the theories that we can bring in to our course to look at some of the ideas that we've been talking about. And as I said in the previous video, theory looks to dissect things, to take things apart. Theory kind of takes no prisoners. It takes ideas that are important to us, that we view as truth, and takes them apart and asks us to look at them from a different perspective or to just destroy those ideas altogether. So Karl Marx was both an activist. He envisioned a certain kind of world that he wanted to work toward creating, but he was also an intellectual. So he employed this perspective called historical materialism, which in its most basic sense means that if we really want to understand a society, if we really want to understand culture, we have to look at the material conditions in which people live. In other words, don't look at the pretty language. Don't look at what a society says they value. If we're to look at the United States and you were to say to someone, what are some American values? People would say freedom, liberty, equality, etc. And Marx would say, but don't go by the words. Don't go by what they say. Go by how the people actually live in their day-to-day lives. Are those the values that are manifest in a material way? Is that on a material level what's important to that particular society? So that's the perspective that he's using. Now, he points to and takes apart and criticizes and dissects the system of capitalism. Capitalism essentially is the private ownership of the means of production, how we produce the things that we need. Typically in America and a bunch of other economies, that's private industry. It's privately held. Private corporations, private individuals own the factories, own the way things get produced, and profit from them. And the capitalist says, this is great for everybody. I make a living, you get the things that you need. Competition helps us, produce quality things, and all of that. But Marx says that capitalism actually is a very bad thing. It's one stage in the overall history of political economy that will eventually it won't be sustained. The proletariat, that is the class of workers, will rise up against the bourgeoisie, the class of owners. So Marx divides society into two classes: the proletariat, who are the workers, and the bourgeoisie, the owners, the capitalist class, who own the means of production. So the proletariat work for the bourgeoisie in exchange for wages. So Marx says that eventually the proletariat will get sick of two concepts, essentially: their own exploitation and their alienation. So I'll make these 2 points quickly. Exploitation means that a worker is paid less than the actual value of their labor. So, for instance, let's say you're working by yourself in an ice cream store. Let's use an ice cream store as an example. Let's say the owner of that ice cream store, the bourgeoisie, is at home watching TV while you're there paid an hourly wage to run the store. And you notice that hundreds of dollars are coming in every hour in profits while you're there working, and you're only paid, let's say, a minimum wage. You notice that the bourgeoisie, the owner, is at home doing nothing, and just because they own the store, they're profiting from all of the work that you're doing. You're being paid less than you're actually worth. You're being paid less than the store is actually taking in each hour. And you start to see that that's not fair, right? That because of this principle of ownership, the owner is making money off of your stolen labor. And capitalism allows that to happen because of the private ownership of the store. So very contentious, very controversial. Not everyone agrees with that. I'm not asking you to agree with that particular perspective, but I want you to see that isn't that a different way to look at the system of capitalism? Alienation. So Marx talks about how we are alienated in 4 ways, that we become strangers to things in ways that make us not human. So first, you're alienated from the means of production. You know, I can't go out and produce something on my own. I have to be hired by somebody else who owns a factory, so I'm alienated from the means of production. Because in a society, we need stuff, right? So how do we get stuff? There's means of production, factories, stores, things like that, that I'm alienated from that. I'm kept from that. 2, you're alienated from each other. Workers compete with each other for opportunities, for for promotions, etc. That we're not really allied with each other. We're working against each other. We are also alienated from our own creativity. You know, that essentially most of the time, you know, that I spend working for someone else is time that I can't spend, you know, working on myself as a person. So in a sense, I'm alienated from myself. And then lastly, you're alienated from your species being. In other words, you can't really be a human if your life is dictated by having to work for someone else and having them take a profit from the work that you do. So that's a really basic introduction to Marx. Again, you don't have to agree with it, but you do need to be familiar with these ideas. Thanks.